Hello everybody, this is Matt, and today I'm going to give you a few tips and tricks about Prefix for little things maybe you haven't noticed yet, or things maybe you've seen and you weren't quite sure what they were. So the first thing I want to point out is the background shading. So in this example, you can see there's the the red background, and then we have the orange. Those function as a timeline. So this request only does basically this one download of stackby.com, but if I go to another one over here, you'll see how they kind of stair step all the way down the page here. That acts as a timeline and helps jump out at you the things that are slow. Anything that's I think over 50 milliseconds will show up as this tannish orange color, and then over 150 milliseconds or something like that, it goes to red. So those will help jump out at you. Great little kind of second read on without overpowering the UI. We want to figure out how to work that in there, and we really like how that works. Back to this example here, when it downloads a web page, one of the things you'll notice is we track how long it takes to receive the initial response, and then how long it takes to actually download the entire response stream. So if you think about when you're writing code to do a web call, you'll do like get response stream, and then you actually read the stream. Well, that's kind of the separation here. So depending on if it's a really large file you're downloading, you got to think the first part is basically how long does it take to get the headers, and then the second part is how long does it take to download the whole thing. And Prefix will actually show you all of that, where some other tools may not actually show you how long it takes to download the response stream itself. We do something similar on database queries. On database queries, you can see something similar when you execute a query. So this query took 225 milliseconds, but about 122 of that was actually downloading the query results. So what that means is about half the time what SQL Server was executing the query and started to send the results, the rest of the time is how long it actually took with with a reader to actually iterate through those results. So sometimes you may see that it takes like literally a couple milliseconds to execute the query, but if it returns a lot of data and a lot of rows, it may take quite a while to download. And depending on other tools that you're using, something like SQL Server may show that it only took a couple milliseconds to execute that query. But the actual impact to your code and your users from a real-world perspective can be much bigger. And Prefix can help you find some of those types of things. Prefix will also show in here compilation time, time around entity framework, and stuff like that. And usually you'll only see that on a first request, and if you reload the page again, those things will go away. We just show those so you have some kind of idea of what that time is if it's there. We're always trying to track down every millisecond of time and where the time is being spent. You probably already noticed that Prefix will capture the headers. It can capture incoming post data. It can also capture the response and the response headers and the response part of the response body. Right now we limit that to only be a certain amount of characters, so if it's returning something really huge, it won't capture all of it. We also capture the modules. If nothing else, it gives you a friendly reminder of there's probably a lot of modules that are being used you don't need to use that you can remove from your app. But also if you do have custom modules that you're using, and they're doing routing or certain things, the performance of them can sometimes impact your app, and Prefix will show you if you have modules that are affecting performance. Another thing you can do in Prefix, on the left side in the list, you can hold Control and click on a request, and when you do that, you can open it in a new tab. That way you don't have to worry about it scrolling by, or if you want to open 2 or 3 of them and kind of compare them in their own tabs, it's a nice little feature. On the left, when you click on these icons here, Prefix will attempt to jump to that part of the profile trace to show what you clicked on. Now, for a really small trace, there's not necessarily a whole lot of scrolling to do, maybe nothing to scroll to. But for a larger request, it's really nice because it'll try and jump down to that exact spot within the profile trace. Another thing you'll notice is Prefix automatically catches all exceptions. So because we're profiling the .NET CLR, we're able to get every single exception that occurs, even if it's thrown and then you do a try catch and catch it and just completely ignore the error. Prefix will catch those. And those types of errors can really cause a lot of performance issues, especially if there's something like you're trying to parse a number or something and it fails all the time. That can cause a whole lot of exceptions and cause a lot of performance problems. So Prefix will automatically catch all of those. Now there are some exceptions that get thrown by .NET, especially on the first time a page is loaded or different kinds of things, and we worked hard to ignore certain exceptions that are not showing up in here all the time as just noise. If you see some exceptions like that always show up, they're just complete noise, please let us know and we'll work on excluding those. Now, of course, Prefix supports logs from Log4net and Log and other logging libraries. And you'll notice here that you can see JSON. So when you're doing logging, if you log an object, that object will automatically get serialized to JSON and then show up in here, which is really awesome. And you can view it as JSON. So, of course, you've probably seen the SQL queries, and you can expand those and view the entire SQL query, which is a really awesome feature. I don't know about you guys, so I've spent a lot of time just writing SQL queries to log so I can go figure out what exactly they were, and Prefix will just show them to you. You'll notice you just scroll up and down here, there's a little caret, and if you ever scroll a long ways and you want to get back to that request in the timeline, you can click on the caret and it'll jump back to where you were. A little feature, but kind of a cool feature. Up on the request and the app up here, you can change the names of these. Changing the app name is just helpful if you're using a bunch of different apps, or let's say you're testing something that calls a lot of different web services. Over on the left then you'll be able to see these app names as well within the list of requests. Changing the actual request name is a really powerful feature if you have something that conditionally does very different things. So like an HTTP handler or some kind of MVC action. So for example, we have dashboarded widgets, and every widget kind of loads different database queries, right? Well, we pass into that action and say what type of widget we want to load. Well, it's a lot more helpful to split out how we load each kind of widget, but because they all happen under the same action, they would normally get all lumped together. So by adding one line of code to your action, you can specify a unique name, and then those will show up in here as unique names. The same function works in our APM. So if you are also using Stack by APM and you make this change, it will also affect APM and how it reports. Another thing to look for is how long Prefix reports reading a request and sending a response. So if you have anything that posts a whole lot of JSON data to an MVC action, Prefix will actually show you how long it takes to deserialize the JSON that's coming in and how long it takes to bind that to an actual class file, which can be helpful to kind of understand, and perhaps you should look at using a different JSON serializer or deserializer. Little tips like that can be very helpful. On at the bottom here, we'll show you what kind of result it was, if it was a view or a JSON result. So this one took 0 milliseconds. It does return some JSON, but it's just not enough JSON that it takes a lot of time. However, if I go over here to get top people downloads quite a big list of things and then it returns it via JSON. You can see it takes 31 milliseconds, which still isn't a terrible amount of time. But depending on what you're doing, you may find some opportunities to improve performance here by reducing the amount of data or changing serializers. Another thing I want to show you on the product list here is how long it takes to render a view. So this shows 297 milliseconds to render a view. And a big part of the problem is there's a bunch of additional database queries that are happening here because of lazy loading from Entity Framework, because somebody added an additional field into the view. So on every time, it's got to go look up that field. A lot of you have probably had issues like that before with Entity Framework or in Hibernate, kind of N+1 problems that you'll see in different ORMs. And Prefix will help you catch those. The other thing it'll help you do is just track how long it takes to render a view. So at the top here, we show send response, render MVC view, and that's 219 milliseconds. Not included in that 219 milliseconds is this additional 125 milliseconds of all those extra database queries that were called. So if you add those two numbers together, you roughly adds up to this. So that 219 milliseconds is just the amount of time it actually takes to render the view itself. And The reason it's so slow here is it's actually just a database or a grid that gets bound, but because it's doing the display for razor commands, those are a lot slower than just using the actual variables directly. Little changes like that can make a big performance difference. So prefix is really helpful if you find something like this where the view seems a little slow, you go make a bunch of changes, you can come back in here, and you rerun it again and see if the view renders faster. So that's all the tips and tricks I have for you today. Really hope you enjoy using Prefix and love to hear about all the awesome problems you find in your software, and enjoy using Prefix. Take care.